Jack Walker was 15 when he found out just how fast the word family could turn hollow. That old place on the edge of town had never really been home, not in any way that mattered. It was a skinny, tired house with chipped white paint and a porch that sagged like it was exhausted from holding itself up. For nearly 2 years, though, it had been the only roof Jack had after his folks passed. No hugs, no laughter, just 4 walls and a roof that kept the rain off. That night, the air inside felt thick, heavier than usual. The TV droned low in the living room, some game show nobody was paying attention to. The kitchen still smelled like reheated casserole, sour, a little scorched. Jack stood in the hallway, backpack already zipped tight. His fists were balled so hard his knuckles bleached white. His aunt didn't raise her voice. That made it sting worse. "You can't stay here anymore," she said, arms folded tight across her chest. Her eyes stayed fixed on a spot just past his shoulder, like looking straight at him would hurt too much. "We've done all we can." Jack swallowed. He'd rehearsed a dozen excuses in his head. Promises to be quieter, to stay out of sight, to disappear into the wallpaper if that's what they needed. But the words stuck like gravel in his throat. "I'll take the garage," he managed, voice cracking thin and small. "Or the basement. I won't be in the way." His uncle let out a long, irritated breath, the sound grown-ups make when they're more annoyed than angry. "This ain't a discussion, Jack. You're old enough to handle yourself." Old enough. The phrase hit like a slap. 10 minutes later, he was standing on the porch, backpack strap cutting into his shoulder. Behind him, the porch light snapped off. The door shut. The deadbolt clicked home. Final. Final. October night wrapped cold fingers around him. A sharp wind rattled the bare branches along the street. Somewhere a dog barked once, then fell silent. Jack stood frozen, staring at the door, half waiting for it to swing open again. It didn't. He started walking. No plan, just 1 foot in front of the other. Past houses spilling warm yellow light, past curtains pulled tight against the chill. Every glowing window looked like a little world he wasn't part of anymore. He kept his head down. By the time he hit the edge of town, his legs burned and his chest felt scooped empty. He dropped onto a splintered bench outside the shuttered feed store and slid the pack off. Inside, 3 shirts, an extra pair of jeans, a toothbrush, 1 folded photo of his mom and dad he never showed anyone, and 5 crumpled dollar bills held together with a rubber band. He counted them anyway. Once, twice, like the number might grow if he stared long enough. The town was graveyard quiet after dark. Every sound felt too loud. The faint rumble of the highway miles away, the creak of the bench under him, his own shaky breaths. He thought about his parents, not in big, movie-style grief, but in small, sharp pieces. The way they laughed so loud it filled the room. His mom's hands resting on his shoulders when she thought he wasn't paying attention. The way they always said, "We'll figure it out," even when the bills were piled high and the car wouldn't start. Jack dragged his sleeve across his face and stood up. Morning came gray and mean. He'd curled up behind the feed store, backpack for a pillow, waking every hour as the cold sank deeper into his bones. When the sun finally crawled up, it brought light but no heat, just hard truth. He couldn't keep living like this. That's when he noticed the flyer tacked crooked on the courthouse bulletin board. County auction. Unclaimed property. Most folks walked right by it. Jack didn't. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing at the faded ink. Short list. Rusty tractor parts. Worthless patches of dirt. And at the very bottom, almost like they forgot it was there, abandoned house, county line, minimum bid $5. His pulse kicked hard. Everybody knew that place. Miles out, Weather-beaten skeleton folks called the dead house or the wreck. Kids dared each other to touch the porch in summer. Grown-ups spoke about it the way you talk about a bad wreck you'd rather forget. Stories said somebody froze to death in there years back. Roof caved in. Cursed. Worthless. $5. Jack glanced at the bills in his palm, then back at the paper. Something settled inside him. Not courage, not hope, just a quiet, stubborn decision. The auction was held in a drafty hall that smelled like old lumber and mouse droppings. A handful of farmers stood along the walls, thumbs hooked in their belt loops. The county clerk droned through the list in a flat voice. Bids came and went like they were doing everybody a favor. When he reached the house, the room went strangely still. $5, the clerk said. Do I have a bid? Silence. Jack lifted his hand. A couple of men gave soft, not mean chuckles, the kind reserved for kids who don't know when they're in over their head. $5, Jack said again, louder, voice steady this time. The clerk looked up, eyebrows lifting in surprise, then gave a small shrug. Any other bids? Dead silence. Sold. The gavel dropped with a flat, final thud that echoed in the quiet room. Jack borrowed a pen and signed his name. Letters wobbly but firm, like he was carving it into stone. When he stepped back into the daylight, the deed was folded neat in his pocket. The sky looked sharper, bluer than it had in weeks. He had no clue how to repair a house. No idea how he'd make it through a Midwest winter. But for the first time since that door slammed shut behind him, Jack Walker owned something, really owned it. And that single fact pushed him forward. The trek out to the place ate up most of the afternoon. Jack followed a rutted dirt road that narrowed into two faint tire tracks, slicing through fields already fading to late autumn brown. The town slipped away quicker than he expected, swallowed by endless flat land and a sky so huge it made a 15-year-old feel smaller than dust. With every step, doubt clawed at him. He could still hear the soft chuckles from the auction hall, see the way folks had glanced at him like he was a kid trying to shoulder a bale too heavy to lift. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was in way over his head. By the time the house appeared on the horizon, the sun hung low, throwing long, knife-sharp shadows across the prairie. From far off, it hardly looked like a building, just a slumped, defeated shape pressed against the earth, like an old-timer who'd finally quit trying to stand tall. Close up, it was brutal. The roof bowed inward, one whole section caved clean through. Loose clapboards rattled like loose teeth in the breeze. Windows were just black, empty sockets. The front door hung crooked on a single hinge, groaning against the frame when Jack shoved it open. A rush of icy air hit him square in the chest. The smell stopped him cold. Wet rot, ancient dust, and a faint, sour tang, like decades had gone bad and stayed that way. The floor was packed, dirt-patched with warped boards. Dead leaves had drifted in and banked against the walls. Somewhere above, a bird startled and flapped away. Jack stood in the doorway a long beat, pack still heavy on his shoulders, heart hammering loud enough to drown out the wind. This was it. This was what $5 bought. He stepped inside. Wind sliced through every crack in the walls, cutting right through his hoodie like it wasn't even there. Sunlight poured through roof holes in thin, dusty beams, motes drifting like slow sparks. No furniture, no heat, no comfort. And yet the quiet felt different. Not the hollow silence of being locked out, but something patient, something waiting. Jack paced the small space slowly, counting steps without meaning to. One main room, barely bigger than a two-car garage, plus a cramped back area that might have once held a bed. He dropped to a crouch and pressed a palm against a log wall. Splintered on top, sure, but underneath, solid. Not everything was lost. He sank onto a broken crate by the wall and blew out a breath he'd been holding since the night before. His chest hurt. His hands trembled, cold, fear, maybe both. He fished the deed from his pocket, smoothed it flat across his knee. There it was in black and white, his name. For the first time in his life, an official piece of paper said he belonged somewhere. That night Jack slept inside the house. Not because it was cozy, it wasn't. But the idea of another night on frozen ground felt worse. He jammed the door shut with a splintered board, spread his hoodie on the driest dirt he could find, and curled tight around his pack. Every noise yanked him awake. Wind clawing at loose wood, something small skittering inside the walls, the far-off yip of coyotes. Cold drilled into his bones until his teeth rattled. At one point he jerked upright, hugged his knees, and whispered into the black. "You can do this." He didn't believe it yet, but saying it out loud helped. Morning light came pale and merciless. Frost glittered across the prairie like spilled silver. Jack stepped outside, stomped circulation back into his feet, breath clouding white. His stomach twisted with real hunger. The $5 were gone. Food was already a problem. He headed back to town. Not begging, not yet, but looking for any scrap of work. He swept out an old hardware shed for a gray-haired farmer, hauled crates behind the diner, scraped together enough for a lukewarm sandwich he wolfed down too fast. Folks started noticing him now. Not big stares, just quick side glances, low murmurs. That's the kid who bought the wreck. Late afternoon, he ducked into the hardware store mostly to thaw out. The bell jingled overhead. The smell of machine oil, fresh-cut lumber, and metal wrapped around him like a blanket. The man behind the counter lifted his head. Gray hair, wide shoulders, eyes keen but weary. "You're the boy," he said, not harsh. Jack tensed. "Guess so." "The house," the man went on. $5 house." Jack nodded, bracing. The man studied him a long second. "Name's Hank Reed. I own this place. You really planning to fix that heap?" "Yes, sir." Hank gave a short snort. "That place took a man's life once." Jack met his eyes. "So did the cold. I'm not letting it take another." Hank didn't crack a smile, but something in his face changed. Not quite approval, but curiosity. Maybe respect. "You got a plan?" Jack hesitated, then shook his head. Jack hesitated, then shook his head. "I've got time," he said quietly. "And I can work hard." Hank leaned back against the counter, arms folded over his broad chest. "Winter's coming in early this year," he said, voice low. "I know that much." Silence hung between them, thick and heavy. Finally, Hank let out a slow breath, reached under the counter, and pulled out a battered tin box of crooked nails and a dusty coil of twine. He set them on the scarred wood with a soft clunk. "Scrap," he said. "Take it. No charge." Jack stared at the small pile, throat tight. "I don't have money for—" "Didn't ask for any." Jack swallowed hard. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Hank replied, eyes steady. "If you're still breathing come spring, then we'll talk." Back at the house, Jack rolled up his sleeves and got after it. He started small, hauling out broken boards, sweeping away piles of leaves and rot, stacking anything that still looked halfway decent. Blisters rose fast on his palms, then popped and stung like fire. Dirt ground under his fingernails until it felt permanent. He kept going until his shoulders screamed and his legs shook like they might give out. At sunset, he stepped outside, wiped sweat from his brow, and looked at the change. It wasn't much, just a little less chaos. But the place didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like the first page of something new. That night, the cold crept in faster, sharper. Jack sat against the strongest wall, layered in every scrap of clothing he owned. Wind still sliced through the cracks, whistling like it was mocking him. Starlight leaked through the roof holes in cold pinpricks. But he wasn't going anywhere. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and pictured it. A tight roof, solid walls, a place where the winter had to stay outside. For the first time since that door locked behind him, he didn't feel like a ghost. He had a house. Busted, forgotten, just like him. And somehow that changed everything. The real cold hit sooner than he'd braced for. By the second week, mornings greeted him with fingers so stiff they barely bent and breath that fogged white even inside the walls. Frost traced delicate, deadly patterns along the inside boards, like a warning written in ice. Every night the wind came harder, probing cracks, shaking loose planks, reminding him how fragile the line was between safe and gone. The house didn't roll out the welcome mat. It tested him. Jack figured that out quick. One night a fierce gust ripped a half-rotted board free from the roof. It crashed down with a crack like gunfire, missing his skull by inches. He sat frozen on the dirt floor, pulse hammering, staring up at the new hole where stars glared coldly through. If he'd been asleep. He didn't let the thought finish. Next morning he made the call that felt like lifting a boulder. If this place was going to last, parts of it had to come down first. Tearing it apart wasn't glamorous like in the movies. It was slow, back-breaking, merciless. He pried at warped boards with a borrowed crowbar, moving careful along the shaky frame, testing every foothold before committing his weight. Rotten wood disintegrated in his grip. Nails bent and refused to budge. More than once he slipped, hit the ground hard, air punched out of his lungs. Nobody saw those moments. From the road, the house looked worse than ever. Folks started pulling over again, pretending to check fence posts or scan fields, watching from a distance, collars turned up, heads shaking slow. "He's tearing it down now," one muttered one afternoon. "Told you," another answered. "Won't last a month." Jack heard every word. He always did. He just kept working, his days locked into a punishing rhythm. Wake up freezing, push until his hands were raw, quit only when darkness swallowed the light. Food was whatever he could scrape together. Sometimes just stale bread and creek water. Sleep came wrapped in his jacket, body too sore to care. The house fought back every step. A beam cracked without warning. A nail ripped across his palm, blood welling dark against the grain. One afternoon the exhaustion won. He dropped hard against the wall, head falling forward. For 1 weak second, he thought about walking away. The idea terrified him more than the cold ever had. He pressed his forehead to the rough log, breathed deep and slow until the feeling passed. "Not quitting," he muttered, voice flat and stubborn. "Not this." What Jack didn't know was the talk in town had started to shift. Not warm yet, not by a long shot, but quieter, more thoughtful. Hank Reed drove out one afternoon, using the excuse of dropping feed at a neighbor's place. He didn't pull up right away, just eased his truck to a crawl down the road, watching Jack wrestle a salvaged beam into place all by himself. The kid moved with a hard-set jaw, breath steady despite the strain. No whining, no looking around for a hand. Hank parked a ways off, leaned against the fender, arms crossed. That roof should have caved weeks ago, he thought. Jack kept scavenging. He yanked usable lumber from the collapsed end and stacked it neat. He hauled stones one by one from a dry creek bed a quarter-mile off, building a rough fire ring. When he stumbled across a downed stand of old cottonwoods, toppled years back by a storm, he almost laughed out loud from sheer relief. He chopped what he could reach, splitting logs with an axe older than his dad had been. The work opened blisters, then calloused them over until his hands stopped bleeding. His swings got surer, cleaner. At night, lantern flickering, he planned in his head. No paper, no pencil, just thoughts. Which wall first? Which gap let in the worst wind? How to pitch the boards so snow would slide off instead of piling up. Bit by bit, the house started to change. Not pretty, not cozy, but tougher. The first big snow hit early November. Wet, heavy flakes that blanketed everything in thick, muffled white. Jack stood outside a long minute, watching it fall, fear knotting tight in his chest. This was the real test. Snow drifted against the walls, wind shoved hard at the frame. Inside, the temperature plunged fast, but the patched spots held. The roof groaned but didn't give. Something, maybe just stubbornness, kept standing. The patched roof groaned under the load but held firm. That night, Jack huddled close to the fire ring, feeding sticks in one at a time, careful not to waste a single flicker of heat. He stared into the dancing flames and felt an unfamiliar warmth bloom deep in his chest. Pride. Not the showy, chest-thumping kind. The quiet, hard-won kind that settles in your bones after you've stared down something that should have broken you. He made it through that night. Then the next one. And the one after that. Hank came back a week later, this time rolling right up to the front of the house. Jack looked up from splitting kindling, startled, axe paused mid-swing. He dragged his sleeve across his sweaty, dirt-streaked face, suddenly very aware of how ragged he looked. Skinny, filthy, still in the same faded jacket he'd worn since the night he walked away from everything. Hank climbed out of the truck and took a slow look around in silence. "You shored up that west wall," he said at last. Jack nodded. Hank raised an eyebrow. "Heart's in it, huh? You figured that out on your own?" "Just watched," Jack said, "and guessed." Hank circled the house at a deliberate pace, nudging joints with the toe of his boot, running a hand over the fresh notches. He stopped at a corner where new lumber met old. "These cuts are tight," he said. "Better than anything that was here before." Jack waited, unsure if it was praise or a warning. Hank let out a long breath. "My old man was a carpenter. Taught me a thing or two." He glanced at Jack. "He'd have liked what you're doing here." The words hit harder than Hank probably meant them to. Jack swallowed thickly. Hank turned to the truck bed and pulled out a canvas-wrapped bundle. "Got extra tar paper. Couple boxes of nails, too. Been gathering dust in the back." "I can't." "Didn't say free." Hank cut him off, then softer. "Didn't say pay me now, either." Jack met his eyes. "I'll pay you back." Hank gave one firm nod. "I believe you." As the truck rumbled away down the rutted road, Jack stood there clutching the bundle, chest tight with something dangerously close to gratitude. That night he worked by lantern light until his fingers turned numb, tacking tar paper over the worst gaps, sealing cracks, doing every last thing he could before the next storm rolled in. The house still wasn't warm, but now it was fighting alongside him instead of against him. When he finally lay down, snow hissing softly against the roof, he stared up at the beams he'd braced himself and let one dangerous thought slip through. Maybe this place wouldn't kill him after all. Maybe, just maybe, it was starting to feel like his. December didn't ease in. It slammed down hard and fast, the way Midwest winters do. No warning, no mercy. One morning Jack woke to a silence so deep it felt unnatural. No wind clawing at the walls, no birds, just a heavy, pressing quiet that made his skin prickle. He shoved the door open and stepped out. Overnight the prairie had vanished under a thick white shroud. Snow lay knee-deep, smooth and untouched except for the faint ghost of the road far off in the distance. The sky pressed low, flat gray and heavy, like it might cave in any second. The cold hit like a slap. Sharp, vicious, stealing the air right out of his lungs. This wasn't the kind of cold you shrugged off. This was the kind that watched you, waited for you to slip. Jack stood there a long minute, hands jammed deep in his pockets, feeling the fear creep in slow. Not wild panic, something quieter, more honest, the kind that asked the real questions. Can you actually get through this? Inside, the house was dim and drafty, but it had changed in the last few weeks. The tar paper held. The patched walls flexed but didn't buckle. The roof sagged a little under the snow's weight, yet stayed exactly where it belonged. Barely. Jack fed the fire with slow, deliberate care, using only what he could spare. Wood was gold now. Every stick counted. Every mistake stole heat. His routine tightened as winter clamped down. Morning started long before dawn, when the cold was meanest. He'd wake stiff as frozen lumber, breath fogging thick, fingers sluggish. He moved methodically, clenching and unclenching fists, stomping feet, stretching until the worst ache faded. Then work. No more big builds. Those could wait. Winter work was survival, shoring weak spots, climbing up to knock snow off the roof before it crushed anything, hunting new drafts, patching tiny leaks before they turned deadly. Some days the wind screamed so fierce it felt like the house might unzip itself, board by board. On those days Jack sat with his back to the sturdiest wall, listening to the frame groan and shift, learning its voice the way old sailors read the sea. The house spoke. You just had to pay attention. Food got scarcer. The few bucks he scraped from odd jobs in town barely stretched. He learned how hunger sharpened everything. The smell of wood smoke, the bite of cold air, the slow drag of every thought. Hunger sharpened everything, made the smell of wood smoke almost painful, turned thoughts thick and sluggish, like they were wading through mud. Jack learned to push it down when he had to keep moving anyway. When he trudged into town these days, people didn't laugh anymore. They watched with something closer to stunned respect, eyes lingering a beat longer. A few gave quiet nods as he passed. At the diner one afternoon, a waitress slipped an extra dinner roll into his hand without a word, eyes fixed on the counter. Later that evening, a farmer in a beat-up pickup pulled over on the edge of town and motioned him in. "Hop in, kid." Not another word the whole ride out, just the low rumble of the engine and the heater blasting warm air that felt like mercy. Hank Reed showed up again one afternoon. No excuses this time. He parked right in front, stepped out, and scanned the roofline with a critical eye. "You're cutting it real close," he said. Jack nodded. "I know. Another dump like this last one, you'll need better bracing up there." Jack met his gaze. "I know." Hank studied him for a long second. "Ever think about walking away?" Jack didn't answer right away. He watched the wind sculpt snow into rolling waves across the open field. "Every damn day," he said finally. "But I got nowhere else to go." Hank's jaw tightened, just a fraction. "That right there," he said quietly, "will carry you farther than hope ever could." December dragged on, slow and brutal. Then Christmas Eve arrived. The storm barreled in right at sundown. Thick clouds swallowed the last gray light. Snow came down heavy and wet, the kind that soaked straight through layers and clung like wet cement. By full dark, the world shrank to a few feet of swirling white. Jack scrambled up and cleared snow from the roof as fast as his arms would move, muscles burning, breath coming in ragged bursts. When his hands finally went numb, he slid down, stumbled inside, and slammed the door against the howling wind. He fed the fire, peeled off his drenched jacket, and wrapped himself in the one thin blanket he had. The house held, barely, but outside the storm screamed like it wanted in. The fire snapped and popped. Shadows flickered soft across the walls. For the first time all day, Jack let himself sit still. He thought about the houses back in town, windows glowing gold, families crowded around tables, laughter leaking out into the night. He thought about things he'd trained himself not to want anymore. Then he saw it, a flicker of light through the storm. At first he figured it was his eyes playing tricks, snow and moonlight messing with him. But it moved, flickered again, gone, then back. Jack stood slowly, heart slamming against his ribs. He yanked the door open. The wind nearly tore it out of his grip. Through the blinding swirl, 3 shapes appeared, bent low, fighting forward. A woman clutching a bundle tight to her chest. An older kid stumbling beside her, a smaller shape in her arms, barely moving. "Hello?" A man's voice cut through, thin and desperate. "Please, anybody!" Jack didn't think. He ran. Cold stabbed through his socks like needles as he crossed the short distance. He grabbed the man's arm, steadied the woman as her knees buckled. "Inside!" he shouted over the roar. "Now!" They staggered in on a blast of snow and wind. Jack slammed the door and leaned against it, chest heaving. The woman sank to the floor, shaking hard. The older boy stood frozen, eyes huge, face ghost pale. The little one in her arms was terrifyingly still. Jack dropped to his knees. "How long?" he asked, hands already moving. "Hours," the man rasped. "Truck slid off the road. Couldn't see a thing." The woman started crying again. Quiet, broken sobs. Jack's gut twisted. "Get him by the fire. Slow, not too close. Wrap him tight." The woman obeyed without a word. Jack moved on instinct, sharp and focused in a way that surprised even him. He'd learned cold the brutal way, nights shivering so hard his teeth clacked, fingers and toes burning then going numb. He knew exactly what it could do, if you gave it the win. He heated water, soaked cloths, pressed warmth where it mattered most. He spoke low and steady, even as fear gnawed at his own ribs. Minutes stretched into forever. Then the smallest child let out a weak, ragged cry. The sound hit Jack like a fist to the chest. The woman broke into open sobs. The man slid down the wall, head in his hands. Jack rocked back on his heels, shaking now himself. Not from cold, but from the sudden rush of relief flooding through him. They stayed the night. No one asked. No one needed to. Outside, the storm raged like it was furious at being cheated. Inside, the fire burned low and steady, throwing warm light across faces that had come inches from vanishing forever. Jack watched snow pile against the windows and felt something deep inside him shift and lock into place. This house, this stubborn, broken $5 wreck, had held. Not just against the winter, against something bigger. And in doing it, it had quietly made a choice for him. This place wasn't just keeping him breathing anymore. It had become a refuge, and nothing would ever drag him away from it now. The storm finally eased sometime before dawn. Jack woke to a sound he hadn't heard in weeks. Nothing. The storm had broken sometime before first light. Jack woke to a stillness that felt almost holy. No wind tearing at the siding, no snow scraping the roof. Just a deep, hard-earned quiet that wrapped the little house like a blanket. For a long minute, he didn't stir. He lay on the floor near the dying fire ring, eyes tracing the beams he'd braced with his own blistered hands, listening to the soft, even breathing filling the room. The family had collapsed wherever they landed. Cole slept slumped against the wall. Sarah curled tight around her boys, arms protective even in sleep. Finn, the tiniest one, was swaddled in every scrap of blanket Jack owned, his small chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm that said one perfect word: alive. It echoed in the space like a heartbeat. Jack pushed himself up slow, joints popping, muscles aching in a way that almost felt good, like proof he'd made it through. He tossed another log on the coals and watched the flames catch, spreading cautious warmth across the dirt floor. Outside, daylight crept in, pale and careful. The snow had rewritten the whole prairie. Drifts piled high and smooth, turning the flat land soft and almost kind. No tracks led anywhere. The road had vanished completely. If help was coming, it wouldn't be today. Sarah woke first. She startled when she saw Jack standing there. Then her shoulders dropped as the night rushed back. She pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes glistening. "He's warm," she whispered. "I can feel it." Jack nodded. "He'll be wiped out today, but he's gonna be okay." Her knees gave a little as relief hit her full force. Jack reached out without thinking, steadying her arm before she went down. "Thank you," she said, voice cracking. "I don't even know your name." "Jack." "I'm Sarah," she answered. "This is my husband, Cole. Our boys, Ty and Finn." Cole stirred at his name, blinking awake, slow. When the reality sank in, where they were, what had almost happened, his face cracked open in a way Jack had never seen on a grown man. Gratitude, raw fear, something close to wonder. "You saved our boy," Cole said, voice rough and low. Jack shook his head. "The house did." Cole looked around, really looked, at the patched-up walls, the crooked beams, the rough floor, the place that had no business standing at all. "Then you saved the house," he said simply. They moved through the morning careful and slow. Sarah insisted on making food from the scraps they had left. It wasn't much. Soup stretched thin with water, bread torn into little pieces so it would go further. But they ate like folks who knew exactly how close they'd come to never eating again. Ty, the older boy, stuck close to Jack, watching him with wide, curious eyes. "You live here?" he finally asked. Jack nodded. "By yourself?" "Yeah." Ty frowned, turning that over. "You're not scared?" Jack thought about the long, freezing nights, the roof groaning like it might cave any second, the storm ripping at everything he had. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I'm more scared of walking away." That seemed to settle something in Ty. They stayed 2 full days. The road needed time to get cleared, and Cole's truck, half buried and iced over, took digging out and patching up. Cole worked shoulder to shoulder with Jack, shoveling drifts, hauling snow, chipping ice until their shoulders screamed. Sarah kept the fire fed, kept Finn bundled and warm, kept the cramped space feeling oddly full of life. Something shifted in those days, not loud or flashy, just quiet and real. Laughter came tentative at first, then easier. Ty spun stories. Sarah hummed old tunes while she worked. Cole opened up in bits and pieces, how they'd been heading west chasing a fresh start that kept slipping through their fingers. At night they sat around the fire and talked. Not big dreams or plans, just what it took to keep going. On the second night, after the boys were asleep, Cole cleared his throat. "We don't have a lot," he said, "but we want to help. Pay you back somehow." Jack stared into the flames. "You don't owe me a thing." Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "We set this aside for emergencies." Jack shook his head fast. "No." Cole studied him. "Then what do you need?" The question caught Jack off guard. He thought about cash, supplies, the long list of fixes still waiting. Then he thought about how empty and lonely the place had felt before they showed up. Tell people, Jack said slowly. Tell them this house works, that it's not cursed, that it can hold. Cole smiled. Small, real. We can do that. When they finally left, they hugged Jack goodbye like he was family now. The house felt different when they were gone. Not emptier. Changed. Word spread quicker than Jack expected. Within a week, folks started showing up. Not to gawk or whisper, but to leave small things. A bundle of split firewood stacked by the door. A sack of potatoes appeared by the door one morning, left without a note or a word. Down the road, a neighbor accidentally patched a sagging fence line and lingered long enough to shoot the breeze. Hank Reed swung by again. No excuses this time. He leaned against his truck fender, arms crossed. "Heard about Christmas," he said, voice low. "Heard you pulled a kid back from the edge." Jack shifted his weight, uncomfortable under the praise. "Just did what anybody would've." Hank snorted. "That's what folks say when they know damn well it ain't true." He walked a slow circle around the house, nodding to himself like he was sizing up a horse. "Town started calling it the lighthouse now," he said, "on account of that lamp you keep burning in the window." Jack flushed. "I just leave it on so I can see my way around." Hank's mouth twitched in the faintest smile. "Sure you do." He turned to the truck bed and hauled out a wooden crate. "Windows," he said. "Used but solid. Still got good seals." Jack stared. "I don't—" "You earned 'em," Hank cut in, firm but quiet. "Take 'em." As winter dragged on, the house turned into something steady and quiet at the center of things. Folks didn't come to party. There wasn't room or comfort for that. But everybody knew it was there. A place that stood when everything else bent. Jack worked harder than ever, and not just for himself anymore. He chased down every draft and sealed it tight. He braced sagging beams until they held true. He built a real door that latched solid with a satisfying thunk. When he hung Hank's windows, he stood back and stared, amazed at how the world looked clearer, warmer, through glass instead of empty holes. One snowy evening, flakes drifting slow and lazy outside, Jack stood in the middle of the room and took it all in. This broken-down place had almost ended him. Now it had pulled someone else back from the brink. Something solid settled in his chest, unshakable, like bedrock. The house wasn't just his shelter anymore. It stood for the simple truth that nobody had to freeze if there was even one light left on to guide them. And as long as Jack drew breath here, that light would stay burning. By January, the winter stopped feeling like a death sentence. It still bit hard, still demanded you respect it, but it no longer felt like it was hunting him every single night. That shift changed everything. The house stood strong now, not pretty, never that, but solid where it counted. The roof held fast. The new windows sliced the worst of the wind. The door shut with a heavy, final sound that let Jack breathe easier every time he heard it click home. Cold still slipped in at the edges, but it didn't rule the place anymore. Jack's days eased into something close to routine. Up before dawn, feed the fire, check the walls and roof for weak spots, then head to town when the weather let him. Word had spread quiet and steady. No fanfare, just truth. Need a shed straightened? A porch shored up? A fence reset after a big blow? Folks started saying, "Ask the kid, the one with the $5 house." Not loud, but often. At first, Jack didn't know what to do with it. He wasn't used to being asked for anything except to get gone. He took jobs careful, waiting for the catch that never showed. Pay came in different forms. A few bucks here, a hot plate of food there, scrap lumber he could haul home and use. Every piece mattered. Hank became a regular fixture, not hovering, not bossing, just there. He showed Jack how to measure twice and cut once, how to square a corner so it stayed true, how to read the grain of a board before you ever touched a saw. He never called it teaching. He'd just point out a mistake, explain why it mattered, and let Jack fix it. "Wood's got a mind of its own," Hank said one afternoon, watching Jack run a plane across a plank. "It'll tell you what it wants to do. Your job is to listen." Jack listened, and he learned quick. The town learned something too. This wasn't luck or a one-time hero moment. The kid with the busted house was building things that lasted. More than that, he showed up. Every single time. Doubt still lingered, though, like a shadow that wouldn't quite leave. One afternoon, a man named Dale Brooks pulled up. Hands buried deep in his coat pockets, he owned a little spread a few miles out, and had heard talk through the neighbors. "Don't need anything fancy," Dale said gruffly. "Just my barn door's been sticking for years. Can't get it to swing right." Jack nodded. "I'll take a look." Dale stood with arms folded, watching skeptical as Jack worked. When he finished, the door glided open smooth, closed snug without a catch. Dale stared at it a long beat. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out more cash than Jack had quoted. "For your time," he said. Jack hesitated, then took it. "Thank you." Dale paused at his truck, back turned. "You know," he said without looking around, "most men twice your age don't put in work like that." Jack stood there after the truck rolled away, holding the bills, feeling something warm spread through his chest. Not pride exactly. Validation. The house kept changing in those weeks. Jack built simple shelves along one wall, put together a sturdy table from scavenged lumber, reinforced the floor so it no longer shifted underfoot. Every fix made the place feel less like a temporary camp, less like something that could vanish if he blinked. One evening, as he drove the last nail into a fresh section of wall, a knock came at the door. Jack froze. Knocks still did that to him. He opened it and found Hank standing there, a woman in a heavy coat beside him, and a boy about Jack's age right behind her. "This is Beth Klein," Hank said, nodding to the woman in the heavy coat. "And her boy Luke." Beth gave a nervous smile. "Word is you might know a thing or two about fixing things." Their furnace had quit the night before. Repair crews were backed up for days, and the house was already dipping into dangerous cold. Kids shivering under blankets, pipes starting to groan. "I'll give it a shot," Jack said. They worked by lantern light down in Beth's basement, fingers stiff, breath fogging white in the beam. Jack remembered how the cold had crawled up his own walls night after night, and he moved fast but careful, checking connections, cleaning the burner, coaxing the old unit back to life. When it finally rumbled awake, warm air poured out like a sigh of relief. Beth pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes bright. "You have no idea what this means to us." Jack did. He knew exactly. After that, the talk spread wider and faster. People quit calling him the kid. They started using his name. Jack Walker, the boy who could fix things, the one who never walked away. Late one afternoon, as winter finally started to ease its chokehold just a little, Hank sat at Jack's rough table, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. "You ever think about what comes next?" Hank asked, casual as if they were talking weather. Jack shrugged. "Mostly I think about the house." Hank nodded. "Fair enough. But you've built something here, son. Skill. A name folks trust." Jack traced a groove in the tabletop with his thumb. Trust still felt like a word from another language. Hank cleared his throat. "Town council's been talking. They need somebody steady for maintenance, someone who shows up and stays. I threw your name in the hat." Jack's head snapped up. "I'm not sure. I'm only 15. Hank smiled, small and knowing. You work like you're 40. Silence hung between them a moment. Not saying tomorrow, Hank added. Saying soon, when the thaw comes. That night Jack lay awake, listening to the house creak and settle as the wind died down outside. For the first time, he let himself picture something beyond just making it through the next storm. Not survival. Something steadier. A life. He thought about the people he'd helped. The doors that latched solid now, the rooms that stayed warm instead of turning icy. He thought about how this place had gone from a desperate hideout to something folks pointed out on the road. A landmark. A marker that said you weren't alone out here. February slipped into March. Snow started to weep from the eaves on the warmer afternoons, dripping slow and steady. The world lost some of its sharp edges. The wind softened, almost gentle. One evening, Jack stood outside, watching the sky bleed into quiet blues and grays. The lamp in his window burned steady behind him, a warm glow cutting through the dusk. A man walking the road tipped his hat as he passed. Jack nodded back. Small moment, big weight. The boy who'd been put out with nothing but a backpack and $5 wasn't invisible anymore. Folks saw him now. More important, they believed in him. And for the first time, Jack started believing in himself. Spring didn't burst in all at once. It crept in on small, shy signs, the first meltwater dripping from the eaves, the ground turning soft under his boots, the wind losing its bite and starting to feel kind. Winter let go slow, like it wasn't quite sure the land, or the boy, was ready for it yet. Jack noticed every shift. One morning he stood outside, sunlight striking the mismatched boards of the house, and a quiet truth hit him. He had made it, not just through the cold, the fear, the nights when quitting looked easier than breathing. Through all of it. The $5 house still looked rough. Boards didn't match. Roof carried scars from every storm that tried to rip it down. But it stood tall, solid, no apologies. Just like him. People came by more often now, not to stare or pity, but because the place had become a signpost. Past the old road at dusk, and you knew exactly where you were by the steady glow spilling from Jack's window. That's the lighthouse, folks said. You're almost home. Jack kept that lamp burning every night. Not because he needed it, because someone else might. One afternoon, Hank pulled up with a thin stack of papers under his arm. He laid them on the table, careful, deliberate. You're on the books now, Hank said. Independent maintenance, town approved. Jack stared at the page, his name printed clean and official. I'm still just a kid, he said quietly. Hank smiled. You were, now you're something more. The work didn't bury him. It anchored him. Repairs, builds, showing younger kids how to measure right, how to handle tools without losing fingers. He never charged for the lessons. He remembered too clearly what it felt like to be handed nothing and told good luck. One evening as the sun sank low and gold, a familiar truck rolled up. Cole and Sarah, the family from the storm. Ty and Finn jumped out first, laughing, running straight for the house like it was home. We wanted you to see this, Sarah said, handing Jack a folded newspaper. The headline read, Local teen turns abandoned house into winter lifeline. Jack felt his face burn. I didn't. You did, Cole said, voice steady and sure. You opened a door when it counted. That's everything. They stayed for supper that evening. Laughter rang through the small house. Real, easy laughter. And every time it happened, Jack felt a quiet jolt of surprise, like he still wasn't used to the sound filling these walls. Before they drove off, Ty hung back a moment, shifting from foot to foot. I want to build stuff like you do, he said, eyes bright. Jack smiled, small and real. Then start by fixing what's already broke. Years later, long after Jack had outgrown that worn-out jacket from his first brutal winter, long after the house gained a solid addition and a fresh coat of paint, folks still talked about that season. They talked about the blizzards, about the night a single light cut through the dark where none had been before, about a 15-year-old kid who could have vanished without a trace but chose not to. Jack Walker grew up right there in that house. He built outward, a workshop in back, a wide porch out front, a spot where neighbors showed up when storms rolled in hard or life got too heavy to carry alone. In winter, when the wind howled and snow piled deep, he never locked the door. He never turned off the light. When people asked why, his answer was always the same: quiet and certain. Because I know what it feels like to be stuck out there. Some visitors came, walked the property, and called it a feel-good tale. Inspiring, heartwarming. They'd leave smiling but unchanged. But others stopped longer. They really looked at the house. The mismatched boards, the scarred roof, the steady glow in the window, and something clicked. They understood. It was never about money, never about luck, not even about skill, not really. It was about one choice. The choice to stay when walking away would have been simpler. The choice to build when breaking apart felt easier. The choice to keep a light burning, not just for yourself, but for whoever might need it next. So here's the question for you. If you were 15, alone with $5 in your pocket and nowhere to go, what would you have done? Would you have kept walking past that broken-down place? Or would you have stepped inside and tried to make it something more? And maybe the bigger question is this: is there a $5 house somewhere in your own life? Something beat up, forgotten, waiting for someone to decide it's worth saving? Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West, stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.